Good evening, everybody. My name is Mandy Van-Lanningham, and I am the Prevention Coordinator here at Hope Crisis Center. On behalf of our entire team, I would like to warmly welcome everyone who has joined us tonight for the observance of our annual Domestic Violence Awareness Month Candlelight Vigil. We have gathered in this space today for a lot of different reasons. For some, it's about remembering. For others, it's about looking forward. As an advocate and a secondary survivor myself, it's a little bit of both. But tonight, as we pass our flames from candle to candle, I hope we can all silently honor the space within our hearts that has compelled us to join each other in this simple gesture of lighting candles. But beginning our program tonight is Mr. Jeremy Christensen. Jeremy is the Principal and Director of Curriculum and Learning at Central Elementary here in Fairbury. You know, he's passionate about this cause because he sees domestic violence being played out in the lives of children every day. And he's a compassionate supporter of the survivors that we serve and their families. So for those of you who know him, you're aware that he's a busy and well-respected man. So we feel immensely lucky to have him on our board of directors, currently serving as board treasurer and previously serving as vice chair. I can speak for all of us here at Hope Crisis Center when I say that we are hugely grateful for his continued commitment and dedication to our cause and our program. So if you will please help me welcoming Mr. Jeremy Christensen.
Welcome to Hope Crisis Center's Candlelight Vigil in recognition of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I want to thank you for attending this very important event. Domestic violence, in particular children exposed to domestic violence, is an issue with which I have had far too much experience here in our own community. As an elementary school principal and former teacher, I have witnessed the suffering and the negative impact that domestic violence has on families. Tonight's vigil brings together a broad representation of individuals and groups who may not commonly work together. While we may not always work together directly on this issue, your presence here tonight really reinforces my belief that we all share a vision for safe and healthy families in Fairbury. I challenge each of you to always remember that the needs of children who are exposed to violence are inextricably linked to the needs of the women and mothers who are the victims of domestic violence. Tonight, let's not only cry for those who suffered, while we lift up those who desperately hope for a loving tomorrow. But let us all depart this place tonight, committed to working together to end the cycle of violence. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me this evening, and good evening, and it's great to see the turnout that we have tonight. I want to thank Hope Crisis Center for the invitation to speak tonight, and I'm going to keep my remarks quite short. Hope Crisis Center has partnered with Jefferson County Law Enforcement since its inception. The staff and board are to be commended in the service that they provide to Jefferson County and the region that they serve. Law enforcement continues to train and work the cases. The legislature continues to enact laws to assist us with our work. The prosecutors and the courts continue to take care of the cases we send them. Is this a perfect system? Sadly to say, it is not. But we continue to do the very best job that we can, day in and day out. You, the public, can have a profound impact on domestic violence by making that call when things look wrong and not turning a blind eye or a deaf ear. We continue to battle to end domestic violence, and with continued support, we continue to make headway all the time. Thank you.
It is now my honor and privilege to introduce to you an incredibly brave woman. Sandy Rakowski, who serves as the chair of our board, has graciously agreed to share her own story of survival.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and I would like to thank Carmen and Hope Crisis Center for the opportunity for me to tell my story.
It's not just the victims who are affected, but their friends and their family as well. I am a survivor. I'm happily married to the most gentle, protective, and loving man who has helped me get through the healing process and some very tough times.
But 28 years ago, my life looked very different. I was a junior in high school, an ordinary student. I was on the dance team and involved in theater. I wanted to date boys just like everyone else did. This would be the year that I would meet Joe. We dated for about a year. It was a normal dating relationship. And you know, people don't go into relationships that start off abusive. I would guess that, like my situation, many relationships start off good. And maybe they even seem like you've met the perfect guy, which makes it that much more difficult to get out when things take a turn for the worse. Our relationship became very serious, and I ended up getting pregnant. That's when things began to go terribly wrong. I will not forget the first time he put his hands on me. We were at a drive-in movie theater, and all of a sudden he put his hands on my shoulders and began to shake me vigorously back and forth, telling me that I was trying to trap him. The shaking took my breath away as I looked fearfully into his angry eyes. As the weeks turned into months, the violence grew. And one of the most frightening situations was when he was chasing me down in his car, ramming his car into the back of mine until he pushed me into a ditch and the car could go nowhere else. I got out of my car and ran into a cornfield where he chased me down, pulling chunks of hair out of my head and then headbutting me, causing me to briefly lose consciousness. There were many times I felt like I had nothing left to live for and thought I would rather be dead. Sadly, I came close to taking my life on more than one occasion, but thankfully I was too afraid to ever go through with it. Life was really bad. All my friends were having the time of their lives, and I was living in a nightmare. The 9 months of pregnancy went by so slowly. There were many more violent episodes, and of course they were all my fault. I made him do it because I got pregnant, or because I didn't do whatever it was he wanted me to do or not to do. My parents didn't know how to handle the situation. They wanted me to have an abortion, but when I couldn't go through with it, I stayed in my room when I was home so that I didn't have to deal with all the awkwardness. I gave birth to that baby, and I gave him up for adoption. The very best gift I believe I could have ever given him. It was a very difficult decision, but one I knew would be best. I tried moving on with my life and went to travel and tourism school in Florida and began dating other guys. I remained friends with Joe's sister, and he found out through her that I was dating someone, which made him very angry. He called me on the phone and had nothing good to say to me. He told me that I needed to come back to Nebraska and come back to him. Saying that right now just sounds ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. But something inside just made me come back anyway. Like I said earlier, we dated for a year before things got bad, and he was nice then, so I thought things could go back to the way they were before. Once again, I ended up pregnant, so we decided to get married this time. Things started out okay, but not for long. I felt I couldn't go home. I would tell my parents and they would say, "See, I told you so." So I had to figure it out. I had to figure a lot of things out. There were so many rules I needed to abide by unless I wanted a confrontation. Something as simple as getting a haircut caused a fight. I decided I would cut my hair so that it would be easier to work and take care of the baby, so I cut it. It was the wrong thing to do. I was choked and kicked for not getting permission to cut my hair. Even though I was regularly abused, I still stayed. Oh, how I would wish someone would come to the door when he was choking me or smothering me so he would stop, but no one ever came. Along with the physical abuse came even more verbal abuse. I was told that I was stupid and crazy and that it was my fault anytime something went wrong or whenever I made him angry. Eventually, my job took us to Arizona, where there was no family. And since he didn't have a job, we packed up and went. Things got even worse, both the physical and verbal abuse. On one occasion, his mom was even there visiting. We started fighting in the back room, and I yelled for help, so she called the police. He did go to jail that night, but he called to tell me he was sorry, and his mom insisted that he was and that I should take him back. These situations would happen over and over. I felt like I was living outside of myself, just so numb. One day, when my son was 6 months old, things were set in motion for change. I was washing dishes, and my son was on the kitchen floor by me. Joe had got upset with me and hit me on the back of the head, taking my breath away. I had always tried not to react to any pain that I may endure when my son was in the room, because I didn't want him to be affected by it. In this instance, however, he let out a screeching noise after Joe hit me, and at that moment, I stopped and said, "You need to get out now to protect your son. This cycle has to stop here and now." I began to come up with a plan on how I would do it. I worked for an airline, so I encouraged Joe to fly to Chicago to spend the weekend with an old friend from high school. Because he could fly standby for $5, it wasn't a difficult decision for him to make. I still don't know how I was able to convince him that our son should stay with me, but I'm sure glad that I did. The day he got on the plane was the same day my sister-in-law flew in to help me get the necessities and pack up my car. We drove to Kansas so that we could stay with her and my brother where we would be safe. But it only took him a few weeks to find me, since I left an easy trail of ATM transactions for him to follow. He had me served with papers saying I would go to jail if I didn't return my son back to Arizona. I didn't have money to get an attorney, and the state wouldn't appoint me one since I had no proof that he had an attorney. So I felt I had no choice but to take my son back to Arizona. I led Joe to believe that I was willing to work things out. I would tell him that I was going to work on my days off, but I was really looking for a place for us to live. I was taking a risk that he would find out the truth, but I was willing to take that chance. Several weeks before I planned to leave, there was another fight, and I called 911. As usual, when they arrived, I changed my mind and said nothing was wrong. Joe always threatened more harm if I turned him in, so I didn't want to do that. One of the officers pulled me aside and told me he knew I was being abused and that they were going to keep him for 12 hours, so I needed to get what I could and get out. My parents flew down and helped me to get into a place to live. They stayed with me for a few days so I could get things figured out with daycare and work. I got an order of protection and thought I was ready to do this as my parents left for home. It wasn't over. I spent months looking over my shoulder. He didn't know where I lived, but he knew where I worked. Finally, he showed up at my work, disconnected the spark plugs in my car, so when I tried to leave, it wouldn't start and I couldn't leave. Thankfully, I had someone from work walk with me to my car, so I wasn't alone, but it didn't make things any easier. More months passed and the harassment continued until he finally agreed to a divorce. We went to a place where we had papers drawn up and had come to an agreement with the divorce decree. I was still under his so-called spell of fear, so I pretty much agreed to his requests. I just wanted out and thought it would be done and over with once the papers were signed, but I was wrong. He joined the military and was sent off to boot camp in North Carolina. I decided that I needed to go back home to Nebraska where most of my family lived. I couldn't see it then, but boy, I was so fortunate that he joined the military. After months of boot camp, he was sent to Germany where he stayed for several years. The physical abuse was finally over, but the verbal abuse continued over the phone. I know it doesn't make any sense why I would talk to him on the phone, but I did. Once I got back to Nebraska, I was intent on starting over fresh. I had no intention of ever getting married or even dating. I didn't want to go through anything like that again. I needed to focus on my child and my life. That's when the love of my life was introduced to me. I tried to fight it, but he loved my son like he was his own. He was so protective over us and I felt so safe with him. And we were married 9 months later. Things were definitely looking up in our lives. However, we would continue to get phone calls from Joe who would want to come and visit our son. We would abide by the divorce decree and allow it against our best judgment. It was always a battle of words. Our marriage grew stronger even through the stress of this. We pulled through as best we could. and we've added 2 more children to our family and have tried to use our experiences to help us through life and teach our children about the dangers and the real truth of domestic and sexual assault. It was easy to be hateful and bitter towards Joe, but only through my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was I able to finally forgive him for all that he'd done. My oldest son was married last year, and Joe was at the wedding. He came up to my husband and thanked him for raising our son so well. I still feel very uncomfortable with him in the same room as myself, but I've been freed of the pain and fear that I've suffered for so long. There is hope. I pray that if someone you know is in a violent situation, that you stay by their side no matter what. As a friend or a family member, guide them to a place like Hope Crisis Center where they're equipped to help. Sometimes victims aren't ready to leave. Sometimes they keep going back and I don't know why, but they need your support and your love and your prayers. And as family and friends, we need to be ready to help them when they're ready to leave. Love them and pray for them. Thank you.